Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Before we begin, I think I should note that I had originally recorded another crime report that I was going to be profiling, but this particular crime had been making the rounds for about the last 48 hours or so with people talking about it. One of my subs had posted it and I retweeted it on my Twitter, so I decided that I was going to go ahead and tackle this one instead, because there's a point that I want to make near the end of this that I think people need to hear. Panama City Beach, Florida, April 9th, 2023. 11:11 p.m. Airman First Class Davon Larry was a Security Forces airman stationed at Tyndall Air Force Base near Panama City. Late on the night of April 9th, an altercation occurred at a bar called Coyote Ugly between two groups of men. Details on the cause of the fight are unknown, but what is known is that Ross Johnson was there that night. Johnson is an amateur MMA fighter and a wannabe tough guy. He had been involved in a verbal argument with a group of men inside the bar. It escalated and continued outside. Surveillance video shows Johnson at the outdoor patio when a female alerts him to something. Ross then jumps over the patio fence of the bar so that he could take part in whatever was going on. At that point, Johnson encountered Airman Larry and sucker punched him, striking him behind the left ear. Hits to the back of the head or behind the ear is illegal in things like boxing and the UFC, and that's for a reason. Even an amateur MMA person like this Johnson thug knows how dangerous that kind of thing is. Johnson, by his own account, was aware that he had most likely committed a killing. He sent a text message to his girlfriend immediately after he attacked Airman Larry. The message said, "Dude is still not moving." One of Johnson's friends in a recorded statement says that after the killing, Johnson told him, "Man, I hit that guy, I laid him out, and I think I killed him." Yet at no point, however, did Johnson even attempt to summon medical aid. Instead, this thug ran away. Because he's so tough. He fled the scene of his crime in an Uber or some other kind of rideshare. He went back to a Holiday Inn hotel that he was staying in, and at that point, he began trying to change his clothes. Now, why would he do that? Was he perhaps trying to change his appearance? There were plenty of witnesses who saw him kill Airman Larry. Was he trying to make it harder for authorities to identify him based on what he was last seen wearing? Well, whatever his motive was for trying to change his clothing, he admitted that he saw police outside the hotel he was staying at, but rather than turn himself in, the thug fled for the second time that night. Because he's so tough. So this criminal kills a member of this country's military, and he flees the scene of the crime, and then he flees a second time from the police later that night. He went to a hotel that apparently some gal pals or whomever were staying at. When he was finally captured by the authorities, he gave a story that's about what you would expect from a creep like him. He claimed that he was in fear of his life when he ran up on Airman Larry and killed him. He was scared for his life, so that's why he ran to an altercation, because he was scared for his life. He claimed that Airman Larry had yelled, "Hey." That's what Johnson told the police. He didn't say Airman Larry did anything to him. He didn't say that the airman had hit anyone, didn't even hit him, didn't even attack him. He didn't say that Airman Larry so much as looked at him. All Johnson says is that Airman Larry was running to the altercation and yelled, "Hey." Clearly, Airman Larry was trying to break up the fight. But Johnson also admitted to police that he is left-handed. That's important, because since his left side is his dominant side, that means when he struck Airman Larry, it was with his left fist. And since Airman Larry was struck on the left side of his head behind the ear, that means the killer was behind his victim. Or at the very least, he was immediately at Airman Larry's rear left side. He didn't face Airman Larry like a man. He sucker punched him from behind or from his blind side like a coward. That is, unless someone's going to tell us that you can stand in front of someone and punch them behind their left ear with your left hand. And to do so hard enough to cause a hematoma, which was the cause of death for Airman Davon Larry. And this killer Johnson is so dishonest that even the police in Florida, of all places, wrote in their report multiple times that, quote, "It should be noted the defendant changed his story multiple times while being questioned, in particular about him hitting the victim. He claimed he pushed the victim, then stated he struck the victim with his right hand, and once again changed his story saying he struck the victim with his left hand." Later in the report, the police wrote the defendant continuously omitted facts regarding the incident. So the police in Florida, who are not any black person's friend, made it a point to state multiple times in their own affidavit that this guy kept changing his story. And you know it has to be significant because it's not unusual for people's accounting of a particular crime to change a little bit when they tell it, but a little bit. Incidents of high stress get remembered a little bit differently when people try to tell it later on. That's to be expected. But this was the night of the killing. And obviously even the police didn't think this guy was being honest with them because they wrote in their own affidavit multiple times that his story kept changing. That means the police are making it clear they don't see him as credible at all. At last report, the killer was being held on a bond of $250,000. Considering that this is a violent thug who engages in fighting as his recreation, and that he killed someone, a member of the military, completely without reason, and that he fled from the police not once but twice, first from the scene of the killing he committed, and secondly from the hotel he had been hiding in, it is ridiculous that he isn't being held without bond. Or rather, it's typical white privilege. And speaking of which, you have the white media and other assorted liars trying to rewrite this one already. You have people trying to claim that this was an accident. No, it wasn't. He intentionally hit Airman Larry as hard as he could. The police's affidavit says so. He, quote, intentionally committed an act, striking the victim, causing the victim's death. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power tools, because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. He didn't accidentally sucker punch that man. He didn't accidentally strike him. He did it on purpose. That is, unless the white media and these other online liars want us to believe that he accidentally jumped the patio fence at the bar, then accidentally sucker punched Airman Larry, then accidentally sent a text message to some gal pal of his, but accidentally didn't call 911, and then I suppose the killer accidentally called an Uber or whatever so he could flee the scene, and then he accidentally went to his hotel and accidentally tried to change his clothes, and then when he saw the police outside his window, he accidentally fled the scene the second time for the night and accidentally wound up at a hotel where some broads he knew were at, right? How does anyone accidentally do all that? See, looking at the headlines the white media puts up, they try to make it sound as if Airman Larry was in a fist fight with this guy, when the truth of the matter was this guy actually attacked Airman Larry. But this is the narrative that the white media is trying to manufacture. Obviously, this thug is hoping to set up some sort of stand-your-ground defense, and the white media is trying to help him do it. Predictably, the white media is really not saying anything about Airman First Class Davon Larry or his service to the United States. See, that's what always happens whenever there's a black victim who the white media can't dirty up. They decide, well, let's not say anything about him at all. And of course, we're not hearing anything about the killer's past. Does he have any prior criminal record? What did his neighbors say about him? Was he known to be violent and quarrelsome at work or at his job? Did he even have a job? See, when a black person is accused of harming a non-black person, all we hear about is the black person. And when the victim is black, all we hear about is the black person. When a non-black person is accused of harming a black person, all we hear about from the white media is how difficult it will be to convict, how prosecutors are probably overcharging, and you should just take what you can get. Well, it's probably going to get pleaded out anyway. The white media makes sure that they set the stage for that. Seems on an almost monthly basis we hear about some white supremacists who call themselves doing MMA or some roided up Neanderthal who gets into violent altercations with randos on the street or who tries to beat his girlfriend to death. MMA has become a magnet for white supremacists, perverted would-be survivalist, wannabe tough guys, and mentally unstable morons. This creep Johnson wasn't afraid for his life at all that night. He didn't jump over a fence and run to a fight because he was afraid. He did it because, like a lot of these MMA morons, he wanted to try out some of the stuff that he had been practicing in his amateur fights. That's the reason why he did it. Now, we all know that a lot of these white supremacists are obsessed with MMA because they think it will help them to better carry out violence against black people. We see this especially among police. But you need to understand that there's a lot of these thugs running around just waiting for a chance to ambush someone, and they don't wear police uniforms. In the last few years, we've seen more than a few instances of black servicemen in particular who are suddenly and without provocation killed by violent criminals. You'll recall that back in 2017, Army First Lieutenant Richard Collins III was visiting a group of friends at the University of Maryland when a white supremacist named Sean Urbanski ran up on him and stabbed him to death. That guy had been out stalking, looking for a black person he could go after. By the way, Urbanski was part of a Facebook group calling itself Alt-Right Nation. He also downloaded racist memes and supported violence against black people. But the judge on the case refused to allow prosecutors to bring the hate crime charges because the judge said they lacked evidence. This same judge also denied the prosecutor's request that this race terrorist be given life without parole. The judge decided that he should at least have a chance at parole someday because, as the judge put it, this was his first offense. And likewise, we've seen punks like that Pentland character who assaulted a black pedestrian and got a slap on the wrist, and that happened just 2 years ago. Your Biden-appointed black defense secretary did absolutely nothing about that punk. The military will routinely give out advisories for their personnel if a few of them are killed or otherwise harmed in a particular town. But Lloyd Austin's not punishing military personnel who attack black people, and he's not saying boo when black military personnel are attacked. Gee, anyone see a pattern forming here? Don't let the white media or anyone else tell you that this was some sort of accident. Davon Larry wasn't accidentally hit in the head. He was intentionally struck for the purpose of harming him, which is exactly what happened. This society protects and makes excuses for anti-black violence. Black people, especially black military personnel, must be aware of this. Black people in general and black military personnel in specific have to make sure that they've got each other's backs. Black military personnel need to make it a point to practice group protection. But what's true for the group is also true for the individual. Personal protection is not just a must, it is your right. We can all agree that an Airman First Class Davon Larry or a First Lieutenant Richard Collins III is of far more value to society than trash like Urbanski or this Johnson creep. The white media and the military can pretend that these are all just accidents happening to these black personnel, but we know better. Because while we can't stop the next would-be attacker from trying something, what we can do and should do is be prepared to ensure that we don't become their next victim. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Morris Bodden, Wesley Monroe, Philander Bryant, R. Laz, and Clifton Johnson. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.